Good afternoon / morning, depending on where you are right now. It's great to have you here with us for the first panel discussion of Early Music America's Well-Tempered Musician program, which we're delighted to be running from January through the end of March. So today's discussion includes 4 wonderful musicians, all of whom are going to talk a little bit about their field training while practicing as a musician, as an early musician. They're all early musicians. And I think we're all going to learn a great deal about what they can offer through their training and what was involved in actually training. They've all come at this from very different perspectives and made decisions as to train for different reasons. But all of it in the end for us to be healthier human beings and better musicians. So I'd like to introduce all 4 of our guests. And I believe they're going to magically appear on the screen. There they are. So I'll introduce them one at a time. Elisabeth Reed is a Baroque cellist and gambist who lives in the Bay Area. She's a practitioner at Feldenkrais, and I just learned has been practicing Feldenkrais for 20 years now. Carla Sciaky is based just outside of Denver, Colorado. Background is originally as a folk musician, and she has been working also playing as a Baroque cellist with the Baroque Chamber Orchestra of Colorado. Carla is involved in various different trainings, alternative health therapies and modalities, including she's in process as training as a DreamBuilder therapist, which is a spiritually based life coaching program. Marisa de Silva is based in Los Angeles. Marisa is a singer and also Alexander technique practitioner and has been doing so for about 15 years now. Claire Garabedian is based just outside of Edinburgh in Scotland. So it is late and cold and dark where she is right now. And Claire is originally a Baroque cellist. She continues to be a Baroque cellist, but also has trained as a music therapist and a gerontologist, and has been doing so for about the last 15 years as well. So absolutely delighted that you're all here to share your experiences. And I'd like to ask you each one by one. I'm going to just start, we'll go in the order we just started, starting with Elisabeth. If Elisabeth could just talk a little bit about Feldenkrais and what it was that attracted you to Feldenkrais at the time that you were in graduate school.
Yeah, the Feldenkrais method I think it suffers a little bit from its name. I think it would be more well known if it had a different name, but it's named after a man called Moshe Feldenkrais. People often misunderstand and think it's Feldenkrais and it's some kind of religious group, but it's not. Actually, he was a Russian-born Israeli physicist, and he's actually was an interesting blend of Western and Eastern wisdom, because he also was a judo master, and he developed the method actually because of injuries to his knees from playing soccer when he was young, and he did a lot of self-observation and came up with this method, which he actually started teaching when he was 50. And he did several trainings in the United States and also in Israel. And I had heard of Feldenkrais because my uncle did one of his original trainings in the 70s in San Francisco. But the reason I got interested in it was I had always had some physical pain, and I had tendonitis in my left arm for a while, and starting actually in high school when I was quite young. And I also, though, I just never felt comfortable in like that I could create on the instrument what I felt in my inside, emotionally, and with the ideas that I had, I felt also I couldn't express them the way I wanted to. And so I did physical therapy in high school, and then throughout college and grad school, I did a lot of other modalities that were really helpful. I did Alexander technique for about 3 years, and I was Rolfed, which is a kind of deep tissue massage. And actually, it was when I was in Indiana for graduate school that I met a man who had studied both with Ida Rolf, who was the inventor of Rolfing, and with Feldenkrais. And what I really liked about Feldenkrais was that it helps you to see what it was that you do that has created the pain that you're experiencing, or the discomfort, or the lack of ability to express yourself. And so that while Rolfing was sort of working structurally on what had happened, the Feldenkrais was helping you to, see your habits and your ways of doing things, and potentially change them in a really gentle, awareness-based way. And so Feldenkrais itself is taught in two different ways. There's the group classes, which are called Awareness Through Movement. And the nice thing about those is they tend to be very affordable, in the $15 an hour range. And they're taught verbally, leading you through a series of movements that help you to notice what you're doing, and also to do novel things and do what you want to do. And then there's something which is a more one-on-one type of lesson called functional integration, which is traditionally hands-on. You do it clothed, usually on a table or on the floor. Right now, obviously, hands-on work is not in the cards. So I've been doing individual work verbally that way. And when I first started, I would say that music teaching and Feldenkrais teaching were sort of separate for me, but now they've become completely integrated. I feel I'm always teaching Feldenkrais when I'm teaching music, and I work predominantly with people who come because they want to learn how to use themselves better to do what they want to do. And often other teachers refer people to me when they're injured, things like that. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. That's absolutely fascinating that you now integrate the whole time. And I suspect we may find the same with Carla and Marisa to some extent too. So perhaps we'll move on to Carla and ask if that's the same experience when you're working with musicians on a teaching basis. And also, as Elisabeth mentioned, her desire to study Feldenkrais came through her own experiences with physical discomfort. And I'm wondering if that same applies to you all to some extent. So Carla.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Elisabeth. Yes, I would definitely say that I came through all of this, all of my training and what I had an interest in because of my own needs. I had some digestive difficulties and challenges when I was growing up, and they really became chronic, and I developed an eating disorder. I went into depression. I had a lot of anxiety, and I hid it all because I was a performer. And I went both into early music and folk music. So I was in different communities where the culture was different. And in finally hitting kind of a crisis in my 30s is when I found conventional treatments just weren't, there was nothing to offer for what I was going through. And that's when I started looking into alternative methods, and the alternative practitioners that I worked with in various areas that helped me kind of open doors for me, and also helped me really understand how my own sensitivities, which are of course part of what make me able to be a good musician, also make it hard to be a functioning human being. And so how could I take those sensitivities and use them as assets? And that's what led into the healing work. So first, while I was raising my kids, I learned about tapping, or EFT, and I took some training in that, and began to help my kids when they were hurt or didn't feel good, and my husband, and then they all learned it and started taking it out into their social and work situations and helping other people. And then eventually I was unhappy with my vision, and I started studying how to improve my vision naturally, and that reinforced the tapping. And then I found out I kind of moved into the world of energy healing, and that training catapulted my violin playing. Oh, and I need to correct, I'm a Baroque violinist, not a Baroque cellist, with the Baroque Chamber Orchestra of Colorado. And I really suddenly had a listening ability that I hadn't had before, a depth of ability and dexterity that I hadn't had in my command while playing violin, that came with the energy healing. And all of these things came together with my intuition. And because I had to find my own way through all of my pain and difficulties, I eventually came to see that I see the pain or the suffering or the difficulty or the challenge as the doorway to actually myself. And so my practice is called Doorway to Healing. And working with clients, I do it different for every individual because each individual comes with their own set of stories up till now, and then we move forward from there. And the life coaching training is just giving me more of a structure with which I can work with groups.
Thank you, Carla. I'm also delighted to say that Carla and Elisabeth and Marisa, and we will schedule one with Claire, are doing individual sessions as part of the Well-Tempered Musician, and we'll have those dates and the information about those up available to you during this panel discussion. Carla, thank you very much for that and sharing your very personal journey. And I also, want to just bring up the idea of aging as well, and how a lot of these techniques will help musicians as they age. Not just physically, but when I say physically, I mean not just in terms of your joints, but in terms of your vision and hearing. And my eyesight is deteriorating by the day, it seems. So anything I could do to improve that would be terrific. And all of these things, as you lose touch with your senses, you do lose that sort of sharpness and makes you feel less competent. And I think, again, if we can do things that will help us keep that going, that's because as you age, of course, you have a well of experience to draw on, and it's awful if you can't actually express that in the way you'd like to. Marisa, could you share a little about your journey through Alexander Technique? I know that you also started concurrently while you were training as a singer.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. Yeah, I was in between my undergraduate and my graduate degrees when I heard about Alexander Technique. I originally had some back issues even as a early 20-something-year-old, especially when I sang on stage, and it would come during my singing, and it would fatigue me. It would fatigue my voice. I would eventually even start getting a little hoarseness in my voice. And I was doing everything that my teacher was asking me to do. I was practicing all the time. And I thought, why is it that this is happening to me? And my teacher was the one who recommended me look into Alexander Technique. And that's when I started doing my research and found out that Alexander Technique originally comes from F.M. Alexander, who was the sort of originator of this technique. He was an Australian actor, and from late 19th century into mid 20th century, and he had sort of a similar issue as me, which was he had experienced vocal fatigue as he acted. And back then he would do recitation of Shakespeare. And so, these were long plays, and he needed to have his stamina and vocal stamina, especially as the performances went on. But he realized that he was losing his voice. And that is when he went on to his journey of finding, first of all, how he could manage to get his voice back. But in that process, and through years of self-observation, he found a set of principles that were universal to everybody. And he created this sort of modality called Alexander Technique. But the Alexander technique is an educational method and a skill for self-development. Like I said, it's been in use for more than 100 years. And by teaching how to change long-standing habits, for example, in my case, through Alexander technique training, I realized that I associated performance with how I associated performance as a child. I come from a dance background, and I danced ballet for a while. And every time I would perform, I had a lot of postural things that I used to do as a dancer that I carried into in my singing. And through that, probably I wasn't doing it correctly when I was young, and I just took everything in and did everything my teacher was asking me to do. So for example, I would arch my back and hike my chest up, and I didn't realize that that was actually creating a lot of tension in my rib cage, limiting the movement of my diaphragm, and making my breath very shallow. And those sorts of habits were creeping into my singing performance as well. And so through Alexander technique, I realized that these habits were there, and I became aware of them. And then through using some of the principles, I was able to stop those habits from kicking in and find a new way of moving. And through that, it enables, for many people, improved mobility, posture, performance, and that comes, very useful for musicians, of course, and alertness, along with relief of chronic stiffness and tension and stress. So eventually I was able to not have any back pain when I performed. My breath improved, my voice changed because the breath improved, and my posture changed. And recently I've also found, this is kind of my ongoing research. It's not public per se yet, but I've been doing my own research on how Alexander technique might mitigate music performance anxiety, which is something that a lot of musicians experience. And through using some of my own music students, I am finding that Alexander technique seems to work with allowing slowness of breath to happen, allowing my students to feel more confident in their performance, for performance anxiety to decrease in some instances. And again, this is an ongoing thing, so I'm hoping to make this more of a bona fide research project and hopefully publish something down the road. But yeah, there's some exciting things that are happening right now with Alexander technique.
Thank you, Marisa.
Mm-hmm.
I've enjoyed doing quite a lot of Alexander technique myself. It's helped me greatly, even doing such things like emptying the dishwasher. I now do in a very different way. We could move on to Claire Garabedian now. And Claire's area is not a modality in the same way that Elisabeth, Carla, and Marisa have. Claire is using her training as a musician to work with musicians, to work often with people who are not musicians. She works specifically with an elderly population using the music to help them, particularly through dementia. And Claire, I'd like you to tell us a little bit about what took you into music therapy, and particularly into working with that particular group of people.
Well, thank you for having me on here, Karen. It's lovely to be here, and you're seeing this is what it looks like. This is my kitchen and living room and dining room all in one. So there you go. And I moved to Scotland in 2007, and prior to that, I had been playing, my main focus had been being a Baroque cellist, and that still is in many ways my core. But I had the honor and privilege of playing at the bedside of some dear, parents of friends as they were getting near the end of life. I also ended up when I was living in Boston, which was well before I moved to Seattle. I've moved around the US and now UK quite a bit. But when I was living in Boston in the 90s, I ended up helping to take care of a man who was 100 when I met him and died when he was 102. And at the same time, I was doing respite care for a man who was dying with AIDS. And I played for both of them very near and literally during the death of my friend who was 102. And I kept feeling like it was an eye-opener for me, as was playing at a few funerals, that this was really different for many reasons. My family doesn't do weddings or funerals, so I had not done any, I had no prior experience until these experiences of playing at the bedside of someone very sick or very near the end of death, a very end of life. And I felt that there was something very important going on, and that I was doing the best I could. I was playing Bach when in doubt. As a Baroque cellist, I was playing Bach and I was playing various things, but I felt like I didn't really, something was missing. I didn't know quite what to do. I, through a series of people over about 5 years, told me about this organization that's in the United States called Music for Healing and Transition Program, MHTP. And that, I finally took that up because 3 different people had told me about it. I realized it wasn't just for harp players. And I took this course, and it's therapeutic music, not therapy. And I get in trouble if I get confused with therapists, because I didn't do 2 solid years of schooling. I did 5 modules and a lot of reading, but I learned a lot about how music, it was very eye-opening for me as a performing musician all my life. Here was this learning a bit more about how music works and about the terms entrainment and the ISO principle, things about how to match somebody where they are, meeting somebody musically where they are. Now, of course, if you're performing in an auditorium, you can't meet each person in the audience where they are. That's not actually possible. But it did take the focus completely off of, did I miss that note? How is it, and being a continuo player, as Elisabeth Wellens knows, there's that tightrope, and, you get your best compliment is if you don't do anything wrong, then you're kind of not noticed. And if you make a mistake as a continuo player, you're really noticed, but not for the right reason. So there's that tightrope. And what I found was that there was something so much more important. And it doesn't mean that I don't still practice on a daily basis and that I don't work on the cello. But this was about, what is the music? What's the point? Why am I playing music? What am I trying to do? And when I moved so I certified as a music practitioner in the States. Then I moved to Scotland, where it doesn't exist here still, sad to say. So I couldn't do the work I was doing at that time in hospice, which was my main interest at that time, was end of life, because I feel like that is such a powerful, raw, intimate time, and music is incredibly powerful at that time of our lives. So I found myself in a course, and I hadn't done academic. I'd gone to New England Conservatory and the Longy School of Music, and here I was in Scotland, and I'd found myself looking for something that would continue me in this work, and found myself in an academic course doing a master's distance learning that was enhanced palliative care, but it had nothing to do with music. It was all essays, because everything in the UK, as you know, Karen, is done with essays. And I'd virtually not written an essay in my life, learned how to write essays, kept bringing in music. I kept on wanting to know more about how music fit into this enhanced palliative care. Last part was on dementia and palliative care. I didn't know anybody with dementia that I knew of at the time. It turned out, I realize now my grandfather had dementia. Many people I just didn't know. And I learned a lot in that course, and it was very stringent, that last module. But at the end of it, my tutor said, have you ever thought about doing a PhD? And I laughed into the phone and said, absolutely not. And then I asked her why, and she said, well, we have studentships or fellowships coming up, and you're really passionate about your topic, and it's a really up there topic right now. So I ended up applying for that, and I got it. And I learned in that time of doing a PhD to be able to I got to do it with what I wanted to do it, although it was in the dementia department. So dementia, as I expected, took over it, and that was okay. Dementia is an amazing thing in our lives now. It's become much more prevalent, as it's not that it's increased. I think there's more understanding of it now, but people used to be warehoused when they had dementia. It was considered you were just gone. And dementia kind of brings to task everything philosophically, ethically, every way you can think of onto the table. And what I have found with music is, I think anything I do with music with people living with dementia also applies to everything else and then some. But it's been research looking at and workshops, and I do concerts now online where, you know, what I used to do them live, which just kind of came out of what the work I was doing was that my whole idea is now kind of almost like a proselytizer about, you know, that music is this thing that we are all on this call gifted with, that is something, you know, we've worked hard as musicians. I do a lot with embodiment, which, so, you know, we are made of embodied memories and embodied actions and knowledge that go far beyond when we stop being able to use our language. There's a lot more to a person than language, and that's something that people are just beginning to realize as we undo Descartes. I think, therefore I am, which is kind of part of what we're all trying to undo, is that music can create a space. We can, if done the right way, create a space. And when we're performing on a stage for 100 people or for one person, my whole interest now, I don't get nervous when I perform anymore at all, because I'm like, this is my mandate is to create a space where the people that are there, the person, the group of people can connect, and I can facilitate that connection and that engagement through better listening, through all those external things about cognitive and physical disabilities or differences, background differences, class differences. I don't care what differences fall away if you're doing it right. You know, and there's a great quote that says, you know, with the right music, you either remember everything or forget everything. And I think that's basically, we've all had that experience, I'm sure, going to a concert or playing a concert, and you're really in it and what they call the flow. So I've done a lot of research on this, and, you know, worked within academic circles here in the UK, but I've also done a lot of playing, having to do, my playing's changed completely, my whole attitude towards it, and my whole philosophy of the way I work with people, just all of it has changed through doing this work. So I'm very lucky and very grateful. So thank you. I hope that answered some of it.
Thank you, Claire. I think we could, what's so amazing about this is we could talk for many hours about everything each of you is doing. And it's frustrating to have to sort of stick it into a little box on the screen right now, especially during this appalling time when we can't actually see each other and connect face to face. And as Elisabeth said, touch people, which is so essential, particularly in a lot of this work, is that physical touch and physical contact. And I know for everybody, as a musician and as a practitioner, it's just so intensely frustrating right now. And I'm hoping that people watching this discussion will be able to use some of what they take today and apply it perhaps during this time to think about how they might improve their playing and quality of life as we emerge through this period, whenever that is, hopefully later this year. So I wanted to find out from David Simmons-Wood is our producer in the background. I don't know if there are any questions right now but I want to make sure that we have plenty of time to answer any questions from people who are observing. We can take questions either now or toward the end of the session. No questions yet, which is fine. So please, but if you are watching, please don't hesitate. Put questions in the comments, and all four panelists will be very happy to answer. So I wanted to just return to something, you know, Claire, you just mentioned that now you play in a very different way. You don't have nerves. You are playing in a way that you're sort of permanently sort of in the flow, if you like. And I'm wondering where any of you are of how any of what you do is integrated into training programs for musicians as undergrads and graduate students. Most of us went through programs that were very traditional, and certainly when I was in school in the 80s, it was absolutely purely on, the fineness of your performance and nothing else whatsoever. So I'd be very interested in knowing what your experiences were. And I know that Carla, for example, is the mother of 2 students right now, but I know that the rest of you are working with students. So it'd be interesting to have your insights there. If any of you would like to go first.
I'll just say, just as a lead on from what I was saying, that's been one of the exciting things. I believe very much that, look, we were all, I'll speak for myself. Yeah, it was definitely, practice a lot and get in your room and then practice some more, and you're going to get a job in a big orchestra and, all that stuff, or be a soloist or nonsense. But my feeling is that it's really important. I would love to see, and it's becoming more, definitely the conservatoires, as they call them here, very arrogantly, but I shouldn't say that's going all over the place. Sorry. The conservatoires, they are getting interested in music and health. They see that this is becoming, it's making inroads, and there's more research, there's more hardcore research coming out, and certainly Feldenkrais and Alexander is being taught, I know, thankfully, in a lot more places. And I have seen, I've spoken to some of the conservatories here, I've spoken in Glasgow. I believe very much that students will only benefit. I know Longy has got a whole music and health thing going on now. They have a whole stream going on, which is really exciting. But that there is, that it will only make the musicians are becoming, their eyes are being opened much younger. So these 18, 19, 20-year-olds at Longy are learning about this magic we're able to do. That's not only the thing of being a person trotting out on the stage with your instrument and performing, but actually healing and being able to do this amazing work. So I do think it's really important for younger musicians to be learning, and I think it's beginning to happen as more research comes out.
Thank you, Claire. Would Elisabeth, Marisa, or Carla like to? Elizabeth, would you like to?
Sure.
Go ahead.
I think that in general, musicians these days, young musicians are realizing that they have to, aside from a few people who are soloists or get straight ahead orchestra jobs, that it's important to be more diversified in general. I've seen it. I teach at the San Francisco Conservatory, so I've seen it. Even with early music is not as much of a separate thing. Most people feel that some amount of training in early music, at least at our conservatory, is a useful skill to have. I also see the same thing with physical and mental well-being. We do have an Alexander teacher that does regular classes at the conservatory. We have wellness workshops. There are yoga classes for the students. They bring in puppies for people to pet. I mean, there's all kinds of real attention to that. I can't speak to every conservatory, but that's certainly been the case here. And I definitely also feel that attention is paid sooner rather than later to injuries. There's not as much of culture of hiding your injuries as there used to be. I think there's been tremendous progress made that way. And I'm really glad for it. Yeah.
That's very good to hear.
Yeah.
Really, really good to hear. Marisa, I know you teach at Loyola Marymount in Los Angeles.
I do. I teach Alexander Technique, actually, and voice, and I assist an opera workshop there. But yes, it's a requirement. The Alexander Technique for musicians class is a requirement for all music majors. And I'm actually but I think my students are really lucky to have that opportunity, because once they're out there, it might not be available to them, or they might not be aware of it. So, it's a really great time to introduce to young undergraduate students while their habits, like I was talking about, the habits are still not too ingrained. They're very flexible in their understanding of the world, and it's a really fun class to be working with. I was going to say that, like Claire said, I think this idea of wellness or bringing in mind-body modalities or whatnot into the music world is starting to happen more. And just recently, I'm even getting inquiries from high school students or even middle school students who are interested in studying Alexander technique or learning their instrument or singing. I'm a voice teacher, so a lot of this times I get voice students, but they're interested in incorporating more ideas of Alexander technique into their lessons. And for example, I'm not on faculty there, but I recently got an inquiry from the Orange County High School for the Arts, OSHA, down in Orange County. They have a very vigorous performing arts curriculum, and they're having an Alexander technique teacher come in to every week to work with their middle school students. And so I think that kind of culture is starting to become more prominent, and it'll just be for the better in the long run when students get older and they can look back and maybe some, if you could plant a seed, even if they're middle schoolers, then they might come back to it, or they might have an idea later that is not this rigid, how should I say, like it tends to be in the conservatories where it's like Claire said, we have this practice makes perfect mindset, or a goal-oriented mindset, perfectionist mindset, all of that tends to create a lot of stress and anxiety, and sometimes bodily injury to students. The more they can know about this, the other things that are available, Feldenkrais or Alexander technique or therapy or all of these other options that they have, if they're aware of it, I think it's really, really helpful for them. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. That's really great to know, actually, that younger students are getting access and are understanding that basically being an artist of any kind is a holistic venture. It's not just one thing. It's so many parts of us, isn't it? Before we go on to Carla, there is a question, apparently. So I'm just going to see what the question is. I think all the panelists, you can see the question. Speaking of conservatories, what can students do to advocate for more physically oriented study and awareness, not something foreign to the historical sources, without challenging the teacher's kingdom of knowledge? Okay, would anybody like to have a go at the question? Given that, it's hard often for a student faced with a teacher.
I was going to say, and it sort of is a segue into this question, that when my younger child, Rachel, was at Vanderbilt for violin and Baroque violin, I was given the opportunity to give 2 workshops, and wasn't the entire music department. I think it was just the entire string, both students and faculty came and attended my workshop. And a lot of what I do is help people come into contact with and actually being able to identify more easily for themselves the difference between when they're stressed and when they're centered. And an example is my husband, who didn't even know that he was walking around with his busy head and in this kind of do mode. And then he started attending these daily, now I facilitate daily tapping and meditating and breathing sessions open to anybody. And I started them back in May. And he started attending them. And then he said, like, I didn't even know I had that emotion. And now it's relieved. And now I'm so much more connected. So we don't even know how disconnected we are. And then being in school, I watched it for both of my kids were music students. Now one of them is finishing a master's, and the other one is living in the Netherlands and working as a professional Baroque violinist. And knowing them all the way through music school, it's just so intense to be in school. And the students are constantly stressed. So when I went and gave the workshops at Vanderbilt, I actually know that the teachers were, there was a little bit of blown awayness on their part. Like they did not realize. Two of them came up to me and said, I'm going to have to really rethink how I sit in a lesson with a student. And so I think there's just a lot of educating available. And it's my hope that I'll be able to educate educators as well as just students. Because if you're not connected enough in here to realize that you're stressed, what's going to make you seek something to help you? And so having all of these classes, if the student has a disconnect, I don't need that, I have to study. So it's only once the student has an injury or the professional has an injury, usually that's what leads us into finding out what's available for us. So the more it can become part of the culture to be seeking not just wellness so we can play, but wellness so we can live, that the wholeness, that's my whole soapbox is the wholeness part of it. How do I live? How do I navigate being alive and being a mother and being a daughter and being a sister and a wife and a musician and everything else that I am?
Yeah, it's exhausting, isn't it? Playing all of those roles.
Everything that we do feeds everything that we do.
Absolutely, that's right. They're not distinct, discrete roles. Everything affects everything else. And returning to the question about seeking out assistance from a teacher. I mean, I suspect that many early music teachers now, teachers of historical performance, are perhaps more aware than many traditional musicians. I have no idea. More aware of the holistic side of music making because of early music, because it's a pursuit, it's a scholarly and performance pursuit at the same time. You're already used to doing so many things at the same time. But I don't know if that's the case. And I wonder how we should, I'm not putting that very well, but I'm wondering what a student should do, for example, if they're in a program and finding that their teacher is not particularly receptive to any difficulties that they may be perceiving, either mental or physical or a combination of both, because people hit walls all the time. And right now I can imagine that's happening all the time. And everybody's struggling. So it's a particularly difficult time to answer that kind of question. But I'm just wondering how a student should approach looking for assistance. And I don't know if, I'm not looking for any particular answers, but I wonder if any of you have any ideas. Elisabeth.
Yeah. Someone just put in the comments that hiring more diversified faculty is what she thinks is the answer. I think that is a really good point. That no one. We all have our areas of strength, no one person, no one teacher can supply everything to anyone. And I certainly. Sorry, I'm rambling a little bit, but going back to what Claire said about Descartes, I do think that there has been historically a general tendency to view music as an intellectual pursuit, And I don't think that it's that early music and regular classical musicians are all that different in that. But I think, you know, my Feldenkrais practice is called sound bodies. And part of the reason I named it that is because my father, who's an academic, was sort of a jab at him, but not in a playful way. He would always say, sound mind, sound body, take your pick, meaning, and so, and I think one of the things that I love doing in Feldenkrais is helping people to generate that musical gesture comes from physical gesture, you know, and so that you're generating your what you're trying to create in your mind or your emotions or but all of what we actually do on the instrument has to come from a physical, which can be generated intellectually or emotionally. But so I think different, certainly in my experience of my teachers, I felt all of them, I was lucky, I felt they all had the best intentions and were many skills and were really brilliant. But most of them, when there was any kind of pain, would sort of stall out, and or when there was something that couldn't be explained physically, you know, and we've all come up against limits ourselves doing that. So I think maybe this is obvious, but you don't want to just bang repeatedly on a door that's not opening in a certain way, you know. I think it is important to diversify when there's something you need that you're not able to get from one person. Then it's just to see what they can give and what their strengths are, and then look for the other. But don't think that you're wrong for needing the other thing.
Mm-hmm. And I just add that, you know, like Longy, that was where I got introduced to it back in the 90s, to Dalcroze, which they forced you. If you do a master's at Longy, you have to do that. There's a Feldenkrais practitioner who's been there for ages, Olivia Cheever. There's been, I believe they do Alexander technique. I'm almost sure they do there. And, you know, and we had to do that. Like, it was not a negotiable thing. Like, I don't think I really want to do Dalcroze. We had to do it. And it was the best thing I ever did. And that idea that, you know, I also got to study with Margaret Rowell, and I was very lucky because she was all about, you'd get presented with pictures in high school of, you know, bears and different things, because it was all about our physical, you know, it wasn't couched in any specific modality, but it was about movement. And the last thing I'll just say about that is that thing about that intellectual, I don't think there's as much of a difference, at least now, as in the early days between Baroque musicians and classical. Yes, it was at one point really that scholastic and the really out there fringe musicians doing it. Now it's much more, you know, as people were saying, schools will even have you have to do, you know, you need to do some historical performance technique as well as your classical studies, which is great. But you know, and one of the things that I do when I do my stuff is really trying to say, you know, I'll always ask anybody in that audience, because as you know, Karen, they're not always music people that are in my audience. Mm-hmm. And if they all say they don't know anything about music and they wouldn't touch classical or early music with a 10-foot pole, I'm delighted, because my whole premise is you're just thinking too much. Like, just sit down. Let me play you the prelude of the first Bach suite. You know, don't tell them what it is. Play them a folk tune and then move into that. And 100% of the people listening are going to love that prelude of the first Bach suite, unless you've really blown it. You'd have to really it's on you at that point. If that's like it. So that, and then say, guess what? You just heard something by, you know, Bach. You know, that was classical music as much as anything else. And you didn't have to think about anything extra clever. You just had to be there. So I think more of the universities and the conservatoires and conservatories are branching out. And I think it's for the students to also say so. I mean, say something. Say, look, you know, we need this. You know, we need more work on the whole picture.
Absolutely. I mean, I urge all young people to speak out as much as they possibly can. Especially in this country where most young people are paying a small fortune to receive their training. It's very important that people advocate for themselves as much as possible. Before we end, I would love each of you to just say just a few words about your particular, just your particular modality, and try and sort of summarize it in some way. I know that might be hard, but just to try and so that people watching can understand whether that's something that they might be interested in pursuing, or learning how to train in themselves. I mean, that's the other thing. I think people, this is a time when people are looking at alternative ways of being, and perhaps you could actually say something about the training. That's what I would like you to do. Say something about the training and how onerous that might be if it's not too long ago. I think that would be very interesting to find out, because I know for a fact that people are looking at alternative career paths right now to perhaps operate in parallel to their performing career. So Elisabeth, let's start with you, just because you're right next to me in the little screen, so that's why I keep coming to you first.
I think part of the reason I trained in Feldenkrais was that it was very easy to do, in the sense that there are trainings all over the world, and they are very varied in the way that you do them. So it's 8 weeks a year for 4 years of training, but they come in all different types of schedules. So mine, I did 8 weeks in the summer for 4 years in Marin County, but others are, smaller 4-day groups throughout the year. Or, there's just I think that I put in the comments the Feldenkrais Guild website. Feldenkrais is basically an awareness-based training. It helps you to figure out how you learn, how you do what you do, with the idea, sort of one of the little catchphrases, if you know what you're doing, you can do what you want, which is a way of paying attention in such a way that you notice what your habits are, and are able to see if they're serving you, and how to have as many other options as possible. So I've found it really great for injury prevention and healing, but the main thing that interests me about it at this point in my life is how it can expand our capacity, especially as musicians, to express ourselves, to have a variety of emotions and affects and articulations, to be able to have a varied palette as people and as musicians, and not be stuck in sort of compulsive ways of being or playing. So the Feldenkrais Guild has a great website where you can look up practitioners by zip code, by specialty. Most practitioners don't specialize in musicians, and we're a relatively small subset. It's a lot of them are physical therapists or dancers or massage therapists, but it's really, really helpful for music. And even it's helpful if the practitioner is not a musician. They don't have to be a musician to work with musicians. Okay.
That's wonderful. Thank you. That's really helpful. Marisa, would you like to tell us a little bit about Alexander technique and training?
Yes, I think I just posted at the American Society for the Alexander Technique website. Those of you who are interested in getting more information on the training process, there is a link from there where, sorry, that's my 10-month-old in the background. There's a link where you could find more information on training. But the training process for the American Society for the Alexander Technique, which has affiliated societies around the world, takes 1,600 hours over at least 3 years. When I trained, I went every day in the morning from about 9 to 12 o'clock. In the first couple of years, I was part-time because I was still finishing my graduate school. And when I was done with my graduate school, I was then able to go full-time and finish. So it took me more than 3 years. But there are programs now where students are able to stretch out that process a little bit longer, so they're not doing full-time. And that also depends on the training course also. So there are training courses around the country. I went to the one in Urbana-Champaign, Illinois. which was wonderful when I studied with Rose Bronick and Rick Carbo. But I would highly recommend looking into the American Society for the Alexander Technique website. Actually, it's the amsatonline.org. I will try to get that later. And alexandertechnique.com can also get you to a site that can lead you to the American Society for the Alexander Technique website as well. That's great. Yeah. Let's see. But through training, we learn how to work on ourselves, first of all, because without being able to quiet our own selves, we can't notice things in our students. So it's like a two-step process where we work on ourselves and then we work on our students. That translates into our students. And that took time, and that's the process that Alexander himself sort of came up with through his work and his first generation students in the first half of the 20th century. And he felt that it took about that time for students to be able to embody the work. And I actually agree, because in the beginning I was thinking, why does it take this long? Why can't I just do it in 1 year or 6 months? And of course you can get the principles, the ideas, logically understanding principles and things like that, but to actually embody the work in our own, what we call use of the self, how we use our mind and body, and then be able to put a hand or hands on our students and to notice what they're doing is a skill that takes some time. Like how music learning takes time, it's the same. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there are no quick, easy fixes here. There really are not. Carla, how about your own journey? How long? You're still obviously in the process of being certified. I know as a DreamBuilder practitioner, but I'm wondering how long it has taken.
Well, a lifetime, but that aside, everyone, I have such an eclectic mix, and they're all different. So there's many trainings in the tapping world. There's the tapping solutions. There's the tapping universe. There's Gary Craig, who was kind of the first person to bring tapping to the public, into the great public. And there's Robert J. Smith with Tactics. So all of these people teach their own approach. And I've come up with my own hybrid of everything that I have found is the most powerful for me, and then for all the participants in my regular groups that meet every day. And then the same with improving the eyesight. It used to be very hard to find anyone, and now there are many teachers around the world. And in fact, just in this past year, a documentary was produced that and released that exposes you to many, many vision improvement teachers around the world. There's only one teacher of the energy work that I do called Reconnective Healing, and that teacher is Dr. Eric Pearl. That training was originally very an intensive over 5 days, and then a follow-up. I went for the next level of training, which was another intensive over 3 days, and then we had to practice on clients, and then I went and recertified, and I have gone to other yearly trainings. So those are, you kind of go for an intensive, and then you take it out there, and then things just start evolving for you. And intuition, of course, takes your whole lifetime. So I feel like the kind of alchemy hybrid thing that I've put together is so much through my own experience, and that's what I encourage in my clients, is to find the things that hit for them, the things that resonate, the things that are helpful.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And to wrap up, I'm going to give the last word to Claire, just to talk a little bit about Claire, trained originally in her therapeutic field in the States, and then moved here and went down the academic route, but is still absolutely engaged in a very practical way. Clients.
Yeah, and I guess to say, so yes, my training, the real pivot came when I did the Music for Healing and Transition program, and that's still going very strong. I don't know, it's been well over 20 years, and it's accepted all over the United States now, and in hospitals and hospices and care homes. So that training is, I believe, still modules, 5 modules that are in local states. They're not, you go to somewhere in your area and there'll be 5 different, maybe 3-day weekends, maybe 2-day weekends. It's been a long time since I finished, but I've been in connection with them all the way through this. I'm on their research committee, and I have done, they had a conference that was online that I went to this year. And so that was my doorway in, and I highly recommend it. It keeps evolving, and they've done a lot of work, and there's a lot of very conscientious people. It's for any instrument, and there are definitely some early musicians that are starting to get into it. There's a, which has been exciting because I was probably one of the only ones for a while. And that really opened my eyes to the whole thing. And what I do now is, actually being on this, the lockdown has changed things a lot for me, because I had an academic post for 4 years after my PhD, where I was working with research for people for creative arts and people living with dementia. That post ended, and actually, although I've had some other academic posts in and out, it's mostly been me reconnecting with the cello, and particularly the Baroque cello, in a big way, and really enjoying that. And doing now with Zoom, I'm such a person about connection. That's my whole, this seems to be a synergy of everything about who I am, has kind of come full circle. And so Zoom enables me to have people from literally all over the world come on to a Zoom connection. And I do workshops where I talk about, using music as a type of connection, a form of connection, and go through a lot of the training I've done and a lot of the research, and talk about what's going on in the research. Everything I do is, I'm very research based. It's the only way I can kind of deal with the world at this point. So it's very much about, what is really out there that's been evidence based, that works, and why, and how can music be used, and how can you think about yourself as a musician in a different way, both as a listener and as a performer. Even when I teach lessons, I think Elisabeth was speaking about that, and Marisa, I teach differently now, just because I see it as such a much bigger picture, such a much more important mandate we have as musicians. So that's when I do my little concert things online, it's a way for me to get to play, but it's also very much a give and take. And I ask questions, and I ask about, when's the last time you heard something for the first time and fell in love with it? Why did that happen? What style of music did you used to hate that you love now? That's certainly something that's happened for me. So, things like that just make you think about music as a moving thing, and it's part of this whole interconnectedness with everything else. So how can we use that more? I hope that kind of answers that.
Thank you. Absolutely, it really does. And I'll just end with a comment from somebody watching, Marilyn Winkle. She says, as a new mom and professional musician, I'm watching my baby learn how to move, and it strikes me how far back our muscle memories go. It makes sense that this work could take years, which seems antithetical to the tight timelines universities/conservatories place on students to show progress. Thank you all for your years of work and insight. So thank you. I think your collective knowledge and work is helping a great many people today and beyond. And we, all of us, thank you very much for taking part today, and for particularly for the work that you continue to do every day.
Well, thank you for your vision, Karen, because you're the one who drew us together and do this stuff with Early Music America. I mean,
well, one of the only good things about this awful year has been this willingness to gather and create platforms for people who wouldn't normally meet, and to bring together people from a wide geographic area. So for that, I'm grateful. So we have to continue with that. So thank you, all of you. Please, everybody watching, or go to the Well-Tempered Musician section of the earlymusicamerica.org website, and there will be all the resources that were mentioned today will be on that page. We look forward to seeing you at one of the future sessions, perhaps presented by one of the people here, and I wish you all the very best. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.